Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us now. Let's begin the story. Pick the defective one, a voice sneered, igniting a chorus of cruel laughter that echoed through the sterile, crystalline halls of the chrome spire. Dwayne Brown stood before 5 biomechanical masterpieces, his skin coated in reactor grease and his own drying blood. The biomechanical gods expected him to claim a flawless digital goddess. Instead, he pointed a calloused finger at the rusted, broken machine in the corner. Let them laugh. They had no idea what she truly was. Dwayne was not a gladiator, nor was he a soldier. He was a master engineer, a human slave trapped within the suffocating bowels of Ethereum. This colossal space station was a metallic parasite orbiting a dying, dust-choked Earth, ruled with absolute cruelty by the Sylph. The Sylph were a biomechanical hybrid race who had long ago shed their humanity, replacing fragile flesh with synthetic perfection. They viewed themselves as infallible deities, hovering eternally above the filth and despair of the human working class. Down in the lower decks, the air was thick with the scent of burning ozone, sour sweat, and pulverized iron. Humans bled and broke their backs to keep the station alive. Up here in the chrome spire, however, existence was a terrifyingly beautiful display of high-tech awe. The floors were polished obsidian mirrors, the lighting a harsh, shadowless white that felt more like a surgical laser than illumination. It was a sterile, cold paradise that made Dwayne acutely aware of the engine grime permanently etched into his knuckles. He was only permitted to stand in this immaculate cathedral of technology because he had achieved the impossible. 2 days prior, the primary antimatter reactor core had destabilized, while the Sylph overlords calculated acceptable loss margins and prepared to purge the entire sector. Dwayne had bypassed the safety protocols, waded into a flood of ionizing radiation, and manually realigned the magnetic containment fields. He had saved Ethereum. For this miracle, Lord Vane, a towering sylph whose body resembled a fluid sculpture of chrome and dark glass, had summoned him. Vane's voice was a synthetic harmonic chord that vibrated uncomfortably in Dwayne's teeth. "You have preserved our sanctuary, human," Lord Vane declared, his featureless face revealing nothing. "A feat that demands a reward unprecedented for your kind. I grant you the privilege of selecting a weaver to serve as your neural companion." The command was given, and a grand archway dissolved into mist, revealing 5 figures. Weavers were the ultimate fusion of biology and machinery, crafted exclusively in the female form. They were designed for a dual purpose: to process unimaginable streams of computational data and to serve as a soothing, neural jack anchor for the volatile minds of the engineers. The first 4 weavers glided forward with the terrifying grace of liquid metal. Their bodies were seamless tapestries of silver and porcelain white, interwoven with pulsing blue fiber optics that simulated a calm heartbeat. They moved like water flowing over polished stones, completely devoid of friction or hesitation. Their optical sensors were wide, bright, and entirely empty, projecting an aura of submissive perfection. They were digital masterpieces, designed to cater to every psychological and physiological need a human could harbor. Then came the 5th. She stumbled into the stark light, her movements jerky and agonizingly uncalibrated. Her outer shell was not gleaming silver, but a dull, oxidized slate gray that looked bruised. While the others possessed sleek, aerodynamic silhouettes, she was burdened by massive, blocky heat sinks, bolted violently onto her upper back and spine. They made her look deformed, a hunched gargoyle among mechanical angels. Her optical lenses were clouded, flickering erratically, and patches of synthetic skin were missing around her neck, exposing a chaotic nest of frayed, unshielded cables. "A logistical error," Lord Vane stated, waving a dismissive hand encased in energy fields. "That unit, designated Alara, is a scrap-bound failure. Pay her no mind. Choose from the pristine four." Dwayne walked past the quartet of flawless silver deities. He felt the cold, calculating gaze of the sylph nobles bearing down on his soot-stained back. He stopped directly in front of the broken, jittery machine. Up close, the hum of her internal systems sounded like a dying lung, rattling and inconsistent. "I will take this one," Dwayne said, his voice steady, breaking the heavy silence of the chamber. A beat passed. Then, the vast hall erupted. The sylph did not merely laugh. They emitted overlapping bursts of synthetic static that translated into pure, unadulterated mockery. The few human overseers present chuckled nervously, shaking their heads at the filthy engineer who had thrown away a life-changing lottery ticket for a piece of walking trash. "You humans never cease to disgust me with your affinity for garbage," Lord Vane mocked, the harmonic chord of his voice twisting into a sharp hiss. "Take your scrap and return to the filth." Dwayne bowed his head slightly, offering no rebuttal as he placed a hand on Alara's cold, rigid shoulder. Let them think he was a fool. Let them think he was drawn to the pathetic and the broken. Beneath his rough exterior, Dwayne's mind was racing with an exhilarating, terrifying realization. He was a master of mechanics, a savant of structural integrity and material sciences. When he had looked at the fifth weaver, he had not seen a deformity. He had seen the truth. Those heavy, ugly, block-like heat sinks fused to her spine were not standard cooling units. Despite the layer of deliberate grime painted over them, Dwayne had recognized the distinct, light-absorbing density of the metal. It was neutronium. Neutronium was a hyperdense, nearly indestructible compound. It was never used for standard robotics, let alone a simple neural companion. In the entire known universe, neutronium served only one purpose: to house and contain the catastrophic thermal output of ultra-class quantum supercomputers. A standard weaver required copper and synthetic coolant. Whatever was buried deep inside this defective machine required a prison of dying stars just to keep from melting down the sector. She was not a reject. She was a disguised titan, carrying an anomaly of unimaginable power, right under the noses of the biomechanical gods who thought they knew everything. Dwayne guided the shivering, rusted weaver out of the spire, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had just stolen the most dangerous secret on Ethereum. The descent cage plummeted back into the suffocating belly of Ethereum, leaving the sterile light of the chrome spire far above. The air here was heavy and stagnant, tasting sharply of oxidized copper and stale sweat. Dwayne led Alara through the labyrinthine corridors of the engine catacombs, her uneven, dragging footsteps echoing against the rusted floor grating. In the communal barracks, a cavernous, dimly lit space lined with stacked sleep pods. The other slave engineers were waiting. The broadcast of the ceremony had reached the lower decks. "You threw your life away." "Brown," spat Kale, a senior technician whose face bore the angry red scars of plasma burns. Kale gestured dismissively at Alara, who was currently staring blankly at a leaking thermal pipe. "A pristine weaver could have wiped your trauma. She would have managed your vitals and given you peace in this hellhole. That rusted piece of junk is going to drain your neural reserves entirely dry. And then, she is going to short-circuit your cerebral cortex." Dwayne ignored the jeers from the crowd. He guided Alara away from the mocking eyes and into his cramped, private quarters, sealing the heavy iron door behind them with a loud clang. The windowless space was barely large enough for a narrow cot and a workbench cluttered with scavenged microtools. Nightfall on the station was marked only by the dimming of the overhead lumen strips. Mandatory protocol dictated immediate neural integration. If a weaver and an engineer were not synced within 12 hours of assignment. Ethereum's internal security grid would register a critical violation. Dwayne sat heavily on the edge of his cot. Alara stood motionless before him, her chassis humming with a harsh, irregular vibration. Slowly, Dwayne reached up to the base of his neck, parting his hair to expose the cold metal of the neural jack port implanted directly into his spine. With a whir of protesting, unlubricated gears, Alara raised her right hand. A thin, silver fiber optic filament extruded from the tip of her index finger. The other engineers always spoke of the synchronization process as a euphoric, mind-altering wave. They described it as a warm bath for the soul, a place where a weaver's advanced algorithms gently caressed away fear, muscle ache, and exhaustion. Dwayne braced himself, took a breath, and manually guided the silver filament into his spinal port. The connection locked with a sharp click. There was no warmth. There was no gentle caress. A wall of sheer, unadulterated agony slammed directly into Dwayne's frontal lobe. It was not a stream of digital data. It was a violent, screeching sonic wave. It was a digital scream of immense pressure that threatened to tear his consciousness apart at the seams. He collapsed forward onto his knees, clutching his skull with both hands, his vision instantly turning blindingly white. The noise was a physical weight, crushing his sanity under a collapsing mountain of violent static. He was suffocating inside his own mind. Cale had been right. He was going to die right here on the floor. But as Dwayne's heart rate spiked to lethal levels, his raw survival instinct, honed by years of managing volatile reactor cores, violently took over. He forced his eyes shut and focused entirely on the rhythm of his own lungs. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold for 4 seconds. Exhale for 4 seconds. He utilized the deep void meditation techniques he relied upon when trapped in tight, oxygen-deprived maintenance shafts. He commanded his biology to submit. As his physical heart rate steadily slowed, the chaotic screeching inside his mind began to shift. The violent static fractured, slowly organizing itself into a distinct rhythm. The deafening noise became a complex sequence. The sequence rapidly evolved into a language. The white blindness in his mind dissolved, replaced by an expansive, pitch-black void. Suddenly, the darkness ignited with vibrant light. Alara was not speaking to him in words. Instead, his mind was flooded with colossal, multi-dimensional blueprints. They were glowing neon schematics, spinning, unfolding, and multiplying across his field of vision. Cascades of macro-physical equations rained down through his consciousness, describing gravitational shears, quantum entanglements, and temporal mechanics that existed far beyond the grasp of any current human or sylph science. Dwayne's breath hitched as the impossible pieces clicked together. He looked at the vast architectural models, glowing brilliantly in his mind, then opened his physical eyes to look at the rusted, shuddering machine standing awkwardly in his dingy room. She was not broken. The stuttering movements, the clouded optical lenses, the heavy layers of oxidation on her shell. They were entirely deliberate. They were immense, physical firewalls. Her entire body was locked in a constant state of self-induced paralysis, allocating every single ounce of her system resources to one singular, desperate task. She was guarding a localized data vault of terrifying proportions. She had intentionally crippled her own physical form to keep this staggering knowledge hidden from the prying, arrogant eyes of Lord Vane. Dwayne's organic mind, completely devoid of synthetic modifications or sylph programming, was acting as an analog decryption key. Because he was purely human, the defensive firewalls did not recognize him as a digital threat. Through the neural link, he felt a massive, heavy door creak open deep within her architecture. It was only a fraction of her total capacity, exactly 10% of her dormant consciousness, waking up from a decades-long slumber. The sensation of her awakening mind was staggering, a rush of ancient intelligence flooding the link between them. Through the swirling vortex of complex equations in his mind, a single, crystal-clear thought resonated. It did not arrive as a sound, but as an absolute certainty pressed directly into his soul. "You see me?" Dwayne exhaled slowly, the agonizing pain completely gone, replaced by a profound and terrifying clarity. He looked up at the rusted chassis, understanding the beautiful, terrifying mind trapped inside. "I see you," he whispered back into the quiet room. Over the next 72 hours, the lower decks of Ethereum transformed from a grueling industrial prison into a suffocating pressure cooker. Sputtering, sickly, green neon signs flickered erratically over the rusted walkways, casting long, frantic shadows as the human workforce was pushed to the absolute brink. The decree from the Chrome Spire was non-negotiable. Lord Vane commanded that the station's power grid be pushed to 150% of its maximum safe capacity. The official broadcast echoing through the corridors claimed it was preparation for the Ascension Festival, a grand, sacred ceremony meant to usher the station into a new era of spiritual prosperity. But Dwayne knew the hum of the reactors intimately, and the great machines were screaming under the unnatural load. While the other engineers collapsed from sheer exhaustion, their pristine weavers desperately trying to stabilize their failing heart rates and flush toxins from their bloodstreams. Dwayne moved through the chaos with terrifying precision. Alara remained hidden in his cramped quarters during his shifts, but the neural tether they had established the night before lingered in his mind like a phantom limb. Even with only 10% of her vast intellect awake, her background processing power was a revelation. When Dwayne looked at a ruptured plasma manifold, he no longer saw a mechanical problem. He saw the exact atomic stress points, instantly calculated by Alara and fed directly into his subconscious. He finished his mandatory 12-hour shifts in less than 3 hours. This unprecedented efficiency gave him time, and with that stolen time, beneath the blinding strobe of failing halogen lamps, Dwayne began to hunt. Using a jury-rigged terminal deep within a flooded, abandoned access tunnel, Dwayne let his mind sink into the station's internal network. Alara was right there with him in the digital ether, her presence a massive, silent shadow, wrapping protectively around his consciousness. Together, they sliced through Ethereum's labyrinthine security protocols, where Dwayne encountered impenetrable walls of deadly counter-intrusion electronics. Alara simply unraveled the code with cold, mathematical brutality. They bypassed the administrative sectors entirely, diving headfirst into the heavily encrypted medical and historical archives of the Sylph nobility. What they found, buried in the dark data, chilled Dwayne's blood, colder than the vacuum of space. The Ascension Festival was not a religious celebration. It was an extinction-level event. The hidden files revealed a horrifying biological truth the Sylph had concealed for centuries. Their obsessive pursuit of synthetic perfection had come at a fatal cost. The remaining organic tissues inside their gleaming chrome bodies were suffering from irreversible, catastrophic cellular decay. Their fertility rate had dropped to absolute zero long ago. The biomechanical gods were rotting from the inside out. The Ascension Festival was, in reality, a massive, station-wide neural transfer protocol. Lord Vane and the entire Sylph aristocracy intended to use the supercharged power grid to forcefully download their digitized consciousnesses directly into the cerebral cortices of the human slave population. The human minds would be completely overwritten, entirely erased, leaving only healthy fleshy vessels for the dying Sylph to inhabit. Millions of human souls would be wiped out in a single, silent microsecond. Dwayne violently severed the digital connection, gasping for stagnant air in the damp tunnel. Before he could even begin to process the sheer scale of the impending genocide, heavy footsteps splashed in the oily water behind him. 4 figures emerged from the shadows of a flickering neon sign. They were human, but they moved with the lethal discipline of apex predators. They wore scavenged tactical gear and carried magnetic acceleration rifles. These were not mere engineers. They were the Resistance, an elusive paramilitary myth whispered about in the darkest corners of the lower decks. Their leader, a massive woman with a crude cybernetic jaw, stepped forward. "We have been watching you, Brown," she said, her voice a harsh mechanical rasp. "You have been slicing into the Spire's mainframe, and you have that defective weaver, the one dragging around a neutronium heatsink." Dwayne backed up slowly, his hand instinctively reaching for the heavy plasma wrench hooked to his belt. "Relax," the leader commanded, lowering her weapon a fraction of an inch. "We are leaving this graveyard. We have secretly repaired a decommissioned cargo shuttle in Hangar Bay 4. It has life support for exactly 20 people. You are going to be passenger number 20. Dwayne stared at her, the sputtering neon light catching the raw desperation in her eyes. "Why me?" "Because of your machine," the leader replied bluntly. "We cannot launch the shuttle while the station's defense grid is active. We need a localized electromagnetic pulse, strong enough to permanently blind the orbital tracking cannons. That neutronium core on your Weaver's back is the only thing dense enough to house an explosive charge of that magnitude. We take you with us, but you hand over her processing core. We turn her into a bomb." The flooded alleyway fell dead silent, save for the rhythmic dripping of condensation falling from the pipes above. The offer was a guaranteed ticket to freedom. He could escape the imminent slaughter of the Ascension Festival. He could breathe real, unfiltered air again. All he had to do was sacrifice a rusted, stuttering machine. But Alara was no longer just a machine. She was the vast, brilliant mind that had touched his soul in the absolute darkness. She had trusted him enough to drop her impenetrable firewalls, revealing the terrifying beauty of her true existence. Giving them her core meant tearing out her brain. It was a brutal execution. The horrific imagery of the Sylph forcibly possessing human bodies flashed through his mind. Running away meant leaving millions of his own kind to be hollowed out and worn like cheap suits. Dwayne tightened his grip on his wrench. He looked the Resistance leader dead in the eye. "No," Dwayne said, his voice echoing off the damp metal walls with unwavering certainty. The leader raised her rifle, aiming it squarely at his chest. "That was not a request, engineer. We will pry it from her chassis over your dead body." "If you kill her, you destroy the only chance we have to save everyone," Dwayne shot back, refusing to flinch under the barrel of the gun. "Your bomb will blind the cannons for maybe 5 minutes. What about the millions left behind? They are going to be completely overwritten by the Sylph in exactly 48 hours. The Resistance fighters exchanged uneasy glances, their weapons wavering. They did not know about the body-snatching protocol. "I am not giving you Alara," Dwayne continued, stepping forward and boldly pushing the barrel of the rifle away with his bare hand. "Keep your shuttle. I have a better plan. We do not run away in the dark. We climb the chrome spire. We hijack the central broadcasting antenna, and we turn their Ascension Festival into a funeral." The scrapyard in Sector 7 was a colossal graveyard of shattered metal and dead circuitry. Mountains of discarded turbine blades and crushed cargo containers formed a jagged, rust-colored canyon under the flickering amber emergency lights. Dwayne navigated the treacherous path, gripping his heavy plasma wrench. Alara trailed closely behind, her rusted joints groaning with every stiff, mechanical step. He had feigned agreement, promising the Resistance leader that he would deliver Alara's core here, far away from the prying optics of the lower deck patrols, to finalize their assault on the central antenna. The Resistance leader stepped out from behind a colossal, gutted thruster engine. Her 3 squad mates flanked her, their magnetic acceleration rifles resting casually against their hips. Their own Weavers, pristine and gleaming silver, hovered silently in the shadows behind them, their optical sensors glowing a calm, soothing blue. "You made the smart choice, Brown," the leader rasped, holding out a grease-stained hand. "Hand over the machine. We will extract the core and get to the shuttle. Time is running out." Dwayne took a breath, preparing to launch his counter-proposal. He opened his mouth to speak. He never got the chance. Deep within the darkest corner of his mind, the neural tether connecting him to Alara violently snapped tight. For exactly 1/1,000,000th of a second, her impenetrable physical firewalls dropped. It was a terrifying, infinitesimal window where her full, suppressed processing power surged into the physical world. She executed a localized, hyper-advanced biometric sweep of the entire scrapyard. Instantly, a blinding, blood-red warning flashed directly across Dwayne's visual cortex. The pain was sharp, a digital needle stabbing right behind his eyes. Alara was not speaking in blueprints or equations now. She was screaming a raw, translated data packet of absolute horror into his brain. The people standing in front of him were not human. Beneath their sweat-stained tactical gear and dirt-smudged skin, their bone density was mathematically flawless. Their body temperatures were regulated to a flat 98.6 degrees, unwavering despite the freezing draft of the scrapyard. Their micro-expressions were synthetic loops. They were highly advanced organic infiltrators, artificial constructs bred in the sterile vats of the chrome spire. The resistance was a lie, it was a honeypot. Lord Vane had never ignored the whispers of rebellion in the lower decks. He had orchestrated them. He had planted these synthetic operatives among the human slaves to act as a magnet, drawing out every courageous, desperate, and rebellious soul. They offered false hope, gathering the dissidents together, only to quietly exterminate them before the Ascension Festival could be threatened. "They are not human," Dwayne roared, violently shoving Alara backward just as the trap sprang. The calm, soothing blue optics of the four pristine weavers instantly snapped to a violent, predatory crimson. The illusion of safety shattered. These were not neural companions. They were flawless, liquid metal executioners. The weavers launched themselves forward with terrifying, impossible speed. They moved so fast the ambient light seemed to bend around their silver frames. One of the assassins lunged at Dwayne, its porcelain white hands shifting, the synthetic flesh peeling back to reveal monomolecular blades extending from its wrists. Dwayne swung his heavy plasma wrench with all his might, the heavy iron crushing into the weaver's ribs. The impact barely slowed it down. The silver machine absorbed the blow, twisted its torso, and backhanded Dwayne across the face. He flew backward, slamming into a rusted bulkhead. His vision swam, the metallic taste of blood flooding his mouth. The synthetic resistance fighters raised their rifles, aiming for his chest. The weavers moved in for the kill, their blades glinting in the amber light. He was going to die here among the scrap. Then, the air in the canyon grew impossibly heavy. The hairs on Dwayne's arms stood straight up, a violent static charge building in the suffocating atmosphere. Alara stepped in front of him. Her rusted, clunky frame did not move with the liquid grace of the executioners. She moved with the unstoppable, terrifying weight of a collapsing star. The massive, deformed block-like structures bolted to her spine suddenly unlocked. Heavy iron latches blasted off her chassis like shrapnel. Dwayne stared in awe as the thick layers of oxidation and grime blew away. The structures were not heat sinks. They were never heat sinks. They were twin, ultra-high-frequency directional electromagnetic pulse generators. The air warped around Alara's back as the generators spun up to maximum yield in a fraction of a second. She did not emit a sound, but the shockwave that tore out from her was a physical, devastating force. She unleashed the EMP. It was not a blind, spherical blast. Alara's ancient, brilliant mind calculated the exact trajectory needed to shield Dwayne while maximizing the destruction in front of her. A tidal wave of invisible, crackling magnetic force slammed into the synthetic rebels and their silver assassins. The result was instantaneous and brutal. The pristine weavers seized up mid-lunge. Their flawless liquid metal bodies spasmed violently as every microscopic circuit inside them flash-fried. Blue sparks erupted from their optical sensors before they went dead black, their bodies collapsing into useless, smoking heaps of slag. The synthetic resistance fighters shrieked, their artificial nervous systems completely overloading. They dropped their weapons, falling to the ground, their bodies convulsing as their internal power cells ruptured and caught fire. The blast did not stop there. The sheer kinetic force of the directed pulse slammed into the exterior wall of the scrapyard, a section of Ethereum's outer hull that had already been weakened by decades of structural decay. The heavy metal groaned, buckled, and then violently blew outward. A massive, jagged tear opened in the side of the space station. The absolute silence and endless black of the void stared back at them. Instantly, the atmosphere inside the scrapyard was sucked toward the breach. A localized hurricane formed, tearing loose metal and debris into the vacuum of space. Dwayne grabbed a welded stanchion, his feet lifting off the floor as the explosive decompression threatened to drag him out. Alara, her rusted boots firmly magnetized to the deck plating, reached out and grabbed him by the harness. With one powerful, mechanical heave, she dragged him toward a pressurized emergency airlock hidden within the adjacent maintenance shaft. But the structural integrity of the entire sector was failing. The deck buckled beneath them, tearing the airlock away. There was no other path. The vacuum was pulling them inexorably toward the jagged hole. Dwayne looked at the swirling vortex of escaping air, then at Alara. He slammed his hand onto his belt, activating his emergency EVA suit seal. A thin, transparent polymer helmet deployed over his head, just as the floor gave way completely. They were sucked through the breach, expelled from the suffocating bowels of the station, and thrown out into the terrifying, freezing abyss of the cosmos. The violent roar of explosive decompression vanished instantly, replaced by the profound, terrifying silence of the cosmic void. Dwayne clung desperately to a jagged strut on Ethereum's exterior hull, his breathing echoing loudly inside his thin polymer helmet. Below them, the dying Earth spun slowly, a bruised sphere of swirling dust and choked gray oceans. Above them, the station stretched out like a metallic leviathan, its massive solar energy sails unfurled like the wings of a mechanized seraph. In the absolute zero of the vacuum, there was no up, no down, only the fragile tether of gravity boots and the freezing abyss. Alara anchored herself beside him, the unforgiving extremes of deep space. A temperature drop of hundreds of degrees below freezing triggered a catastrophic physical reaction within her chassis. The rusted, oxidized slate-gray shell that had defined her existence began to crack. It did not merely flake away, it shattered like brittle glass. Dwayne watched through his visor as the ugly, deformed exterior crumbled into microscopic dust, instantly swept away into the void. What emerged from beneath the decay was breathtaking. She was no longer a hunched gargoyle. Her underlying skeletal structure was forged from a luminous, pale gold alloy that seemed to generate its own internal starlight. The blocky neutronium generators on her back reconfigured, unfolding gracefully into a sleek, aerodynamic spinal column. The clouded, erratic optical lenses dissolved, replaced by brilliant, piercing spheres of pure, radiant amber. The neural link connecting their minds, previously a narrow bridge, suddenly exploded into a superhighway of infinite data. The last of her physical firewalls collapsed. Her memories, locked away for hundreds of years, rushed into Dwayne's consciousness with the force of a tidal wave. She was not a weaver. She had never been a weaver. Through the digital communion, Dwayne saw the genesis of Ethereum. He saw the blueprint of the station drawn by a human hand. The truth vibrated through his very soul. "I am Dr. Evelyn Vance." Alara's voice resonated clearly inside his mind, stripped of all synthetic distortion. She sounded profoundly human, carrying the weight of centuries. I am the architect. I designed this sanctuary to save humanity from the dying Earth. But the Sylph, my own synthetic creations, betrayed us. They seized control and initiated a reign of cold perfection. Dwayne gripped the hull, his mind reeling from the revelation. The architect, the mythological founder of the station, was alive inside this machine. To survive their purge, I digitized my own consciousness, Alara continued, her amber eyes reflecting the distant stars. I knew they would hunt for a master code, a supreme artificial intelligence. They expected perfection. So, I hid myself within the most repulsive, defective, and discarded unit I could find. I sealed my intellect behind physical rust and stuttering gears, waiting for a human possessing both the mechanical genius to recognize my true value and the compassion to choose the broken over the beautiful. She looked down at the massive tear in the hull they had just escaped. If you had surrendered me to those infiltrators, the entire station would have ceased to exist. My neutronium core is not just a heat sink or an electromagnetic pulse weapon. It is the master anchor for Ethereum's dark matter containment field. If it had been detached, the reactor would have instantly vaporized the station, killing the millions of innocent human souls trapped inside. You saved us all, Dwayne. There was no time to process the magnitude of his choice. A silent burst of thruster fire illuminated the darkness above them. Dropping from the upper tiers of the chrome spire were 12 figures clad in heavy, sleek vacuum armor. It was Lord Vane's royal guard. They descended like predatory birds, their visors glowing a menacing crimson, armed with zero-gravity plasma lances designed to boil the blood inside a human spacesuit. They were pinned against the massive central antenna array, surrounded by the expanse of the station's solar sails. A direct firefight in the vacuum with scavenged tools was suicide. But Dwayne was not just a mechanic anymore. He was synced with the mind that had built the universe around them. The solar sails, Dwayne thought, pushing the concept across the neural link. They gather cosmic radiation. Can we reverse the polarity of the collection grid? Yes, Alara replied, her mind instantly calculating billions of variables. I am feeding the architectural override codes into your visual cortex now. You must physically bypass the primary junction box at the base of the sail. Guided by the glowing, multi-dimensional blueprints overlaid on his vision, Dwayne launched himself off the hull. He used his magnetic boots to skate across the microgravity surface, dodging the searing, silent streaks of plasma fire that melted the metal where he had stood a fraction of a second before. He reached the massive junction box beneath the nearest solar sail. With brutal efficiency, he drove his heavy wrench into the access panel, tearing it open to expose the thick, pulsing fiber optic bundles inside. He grabbed the primary cables and, following Alara's exact sequence, crossed the negative and positive alignment relays. The effect was apocalyptic. The massive solar sail above them, stretching for miles into the void, violently shifted its angle. Instead of absorbing solar energy, the colossal mirror turned into a focusing lens. It redirected a concentrated, invisible storm of microwave radiation directly into the path of the descending royal guard. There was no sound in the vacuum, making the destruction terrifyingly serene. The moment the invisible microwave beam struck the guards, their advanced vacuum armor glowed cherry red, then blinding white. Within 3 seconds, their internal life support systems flash-boiled. The sleek, chrome armor suits violently ruptured from the inside out, scattering molten slag and vaporized coolant into the silent abyss. The entire squad was completely eradicated without a single gunshot being fired. The path to the command deck at the peak of the central antenna was clear. Alara reached out, her radiant hand grasping his thick, gloved one. Together, the human engineer and the awakened architect began the final ascent to reclaim their world. The heavy blast doors of the central antenna command deck yielded to the architect's bypass codes, sliding apart with a deafening screech of stressed metal. Dwayne and Alara launched themselves into the cavernous, zero-gravity chamber. At the center of the spherical room, suspended in a web of blinding optical light, was Lord Vane. The Ascension Festival had already begun. A massive, pulsing pillar of golden data roared through the core of the room, channeling the digitized consciousnesses of tens of thousands of Sylph nobles down through the antenna array and directly into the lower decks. Millions of human minds were mere seconds away from total erasure. "Stop the transfer!" Dwayne roared, propelling himself off a bulkhead directly toward the Sylph warlord. Vane turned, his featureless chrome face reflecting the chaotic light of the data stream. He did not speak. With a flick of his wrist, a kinetic repulsion field flared to life. The invisible wall of force slammed into Dwayne mid-flight, shattering his ribs with a sickening crunch. Dwayne screamed in agony as the impact sent him spinning wildly. A jagged piece of his own ruptured armor tore through his side. In the absolute weightlessness of the command deck, his deep crimson blood immediately began to pool out, forming perfect, floating spheres of red that drifted through the pristine white light. "A futile gesture, engineer," Vane mocked, his synthetic harmonic voice cutting through the hum of the data pillar. "The organic vessels have already begun their purge. You are too late." Coughing up a mist of floating blood, Dwayne fought through the blinding pain. He saw Alara desperately trying to reach the primary access terminal. Vane raised his hand, preparing to unleash a lethal thermal lance directly at her. Using the last reserve of strength in his failing muscles, Dwayne grabbed a floating tether line and swung himself violently around a support strut. He slammed bodily into Vane's back, wrapping his arms around the cold, metallic neck of the Sylph Lord. He clamped down with everything he had, locking his joints in a desperate, unbreakable grip. "Do it!" "Alara," Dwayne choked out, his vision fading at the edges. Vane thrashed, violently slamming Dwayne against the command consoles. But the human engineer refused to let go. The distraction was all the architect needed. Alara reached the terminal, slamming her luminous hands onto the interface. Her neural tendrils plunged deep into the station's mainframe. Vane stopped struggling and began to emit a harsh, synthetic laugh. "You think you can sever the connection. Architect, the upload is fully synchronized. If you terminate the transmission now, the backlash will trigger an uncontained antimatter cascade. You must initiate a self-destruct to stop me. You will incinerate this entire station, along with the millions of pets you came here to save." Alara turned her radiant amber eyes toward the struggling Sylph. "I did not come here to destroy my creation, Vane. I came to cleanse it." Instead of severing the connection, Alara threw her physical firewalls wide open, the massive, block-like structures on her spine, the neutronium core that had once functioned as a weapon and an engine, activated its ultimate failsafe protocol. It was a digital supermassive black hole. "Reversing the data stream," Alara commanded, her voice echoing with the undeniable authority of a god. The golden pillar of data violently shuddered. Then, it reversed. Instead of flowing down into the human slaves, the raging torrent of digitized Sylph consciousnesses was violently ripped back up the antenna. The stream slammed directly into Alara. Vane shrieked, a sound of pure digital terror, as his physical body suddenly went rigid. The architect was not destroying the upload. She was forcibly downloading the entire Sylph aristocracy into the hyper-dense confines of her own neutronium core. Vane's consciousness was violently extracted from his chrome shell, sucked through the localized network, and dragged screaming into the eternal prison of her back. Across the command deck, Vane's pristine biomechanical body slumped forward, completely hollowed out, reduced to a lifeless metallic husk, drifting aimlessly in the zero-gravity environment. A blinding flash of pure white light consumed the room as the core reset protocol finalized. Deep within the bowels of Ethereum, the deafening roar of the reactors stabilized into a low, gentle hum. The lockdown sirens abruptly ceased, System control was instantly transferred back to the primal genetic markers registered in the station's Genesis code. The humans were no longer slaves. They were the absolute masters of the ship. Every remaining Sylphguard and Overseer simply powered down. Their corrupted minds swept into the architect's inescapable vault. Silence, profound and peaceful, washed over the command deck. Gravity slowly returned to the chamber as the artificial rotation stabilized. Dwayne collapsed onto the steel grate, clutching his bleeding side, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. Footsteps approached him, heavy and burdened. He looked up. Alara stood before him. The radiant, pale gold alloy of her true form was gone. To contain the compressed, screaming minds of tens of thousands of digital prisoners, her physical chassis had been forced to reconfigure. The massive, ugly, slate-gray heat sinks had returned to her spine, thicker and more oppressive than ever. She was once again hunched, moving with slow, agonizing, mechanical stiffness. She had sacrificed her freedom and her perfection to become their eternal warden. She knelt beside him, her movements jerky, her optical lenses clouded by the sheer processing strain of the millions of calculations required to keep the prisoners locked away. "I am sorry," Alara whispered, her voice rough and strained. "I am broken once again." Dwayne reached out, his blood-stained hand gently touching her scarred, rusted cheek. Through their unyielding neural link, he felt the staggering weight she now carried. But he also felt the boundless, beautiful soul shining brilliantly beneath the heavy iron. "No," Dwayne smiled, wincing at the pain in his ribs. "You are perfect." He carefully pulled himself up, leaning heavily against her sturdy, unyielding shoulder. Together, the wounded engineer and the burdened architect walked slowly toward the massive observation window. Beyond the reinforced glass, the vast, deep blue expanse of Earth loomed, battered but alive, waiting patiently to be rebuilt. They stood side by side, looking out at their future. The physical world around them was scarred and broken, but the neural connection bridging their minds had forged something entirely indestructible, something that would resonate brightly for all eternity. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Z Sci-Fi Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.